Marcus, thank you so much, and to Paul and Hiroshi, who's here somewhere, there he is. Thank you so much for inviting me, and to everyone here, on behalf of Commissioner Manfred, the 30 Major League teams, all of us at Major League Baseball and the World Baseball Classic, welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I got a chance to walk around campus. You know how good you have it. This is as advertised, so beautiful, and such a treat for me to be able to be here. And then, to be here with these other panelists. Some I've known almost 40 years, Bobby. We both had dark hair when Bobby Valentine and I worked together in Texas in the 1980s. Some I've met just about 45 minutes ago, but I know, just like you, I can't wait to hear what they have to say. I was fortunate enough, as Marcus said, to have spent 16 years in Japan. Japan has shaped my life. It's shaped the lives of my kids, my wife. We feel such a huge debt to what Japan has given us, and our love of Japan is very deep and very profound. So when I thought about what I wanted to say today, there was a lot of information in the well that I could dip into. And so what I wanted to do is just really focus on two stories that I think really underscore how important Japan is to baseball and how important baseball is to Japan. The first one is not through my eyes, but it's through my son's eyes. When we moved to Japan, he was 7 years old, my older son, and he had played some baseball in Connecticut before we moved. And after about 8 or 9 months, he said he wanted to play for the local Japanese team. Now, there's two types. If you don't know, there's two types of youth baseball in Japan. There's something called koshiki, and there's something called nanshiki. Koshiki is just regular hardball. Nanshiki is this wonderful, unique Japanese invention that has a rubber baseball instead of a hardball. And the rubber baseball is important because it's restricted flight, and it doesn't make as much noise when it hits the bat, which is perfect for downtown Tokyo, where everybody's on top of each other, right? So he played for a nanshiki team, and he had a 6-year stint there. It was wonderful. He really enjoyed it. The first few years were pretty funny. There was a lot of cultural differences that we saw. The first thing was, I think it was his first practice. In Japan, you practice all day Saturday, all day Sunday, right? And it's 8 hours. You take a chuke for 30 minutes in the middle of the day, and you have your lunch. So the first practice, I look over, my kid is sitting next to a Japanese kid, and I see a look of horror on my kid's face when he looks over. And the Japanese kid is taking out his lunchbox, and there is raw fish, seaweed, rice, and my kid is like, "Oh my God, you eat that?" And then my kid opens up his lunchbox, and he has cold Domino's pizza from the night before. And the Japanese kid's looking at him like, "Oh my God, you eat that?" Now, the good news is my kid started snarfing onigiris like they were going out of style afterwards, but it was a cultural difference. Another really funny story I wanted to share was he got, thanks in part to Bobby worked with him on his hitting, he got brought up to what's called the Ichigun. There's a Nigun and Ichigun. Ichigun is the top team. So it was his first game for the Ichigun team, and we're playing in Natsugi. And kid, he gets up there, and the pitcher throws him a fastball inside. He just is ready for it. He turns on it, and just a line drive left field base hit. He's so happy. He's at first base. He's looking at me in the stands. He's got this huge smile on his face, so big that he doesn't notice the third base coach gives him the sign to steal second. Right? He's just looking at me in the stands. "Dad, I did it." So I don't want him to be embarrassed that he missed the sign, and rolled the dice that the pitcher and the catcher didn't speak English. And I scream out as loud as I can, "John, steal second." And he looks up, and he stole second. So we were very fortunate that neither the pitcher or the catcher understood English at that point. But this story is not about him. This story is about his coach. His coach was named Oda. And in Japan, if you run the team, you're the manager, you're called kantoku. So it was Oda Kantoku. Oda was a scary-looking dude. When I first met him, I was trembling, so you can imagine what the kids felt about him. He was, he had worked at Kawasaki in a factory. He absolutely looked like he drank too much. I know he smoked too much because every 2K, he's up, at least 2 to 3 cigarettes going down. He had this gravelly voice, just a really scary dude, but just a heart of gold. And somebody that cared so much about the kids. If the practice was 8 o'clock, 7 a.m., he's dragging the field. If a kid needs extra batting practice or extra time for infield, he's always ready for him, right? So he just gave everything to these kids. And he was always there until he wasn't. On a Friday night, we got an email saying that Oda was in the hospital, something about his liver. And so the next day, I had become one of the coaches of the team, and the next day, I'm standing with the other coaches and the moms. And by the way, the moms at youth baseball teams are rock stars. They do all of the work, right? The T for the umpires, the T for organizing everything. They are rock stars. And if you've never been to Japan, and the Japanese here, or people that know of Japan or been there, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's this thing, a habit that Japanese people do when something is really impressive or surprising, and it's this low-pitch, guttural thing. It's like, oh. So, right? So I'm standing there with everybody, and there's this cacophony of, oh. And I turn around, and it's Oda. He's in uniform. He looks horrible. He's holding an IV bag, and the IV bag is going to his left arm. He had brought his uniform, had his wife bring his uniform. He waited until the nurse left. He put on the uniform, and he came to do practice, to teach my kid how to play baseball, right? The thing is, in America, the coaches are generally the fathers of the team. This guy was 7 years old. His kid had played in the late 70s and early 80s. He did this for my kid to learn how to play baseball. It was the most humbling thing I'd ever seen in my life. So fast forward about a few months later, he recovered from whatever it was. I still never really found out what it was. But there's something in Japan called bonenkais, which is kind of end of the year party, right? So we had a bonenkai, and he obviously was feeling better because I was drinking beer with him. And I finally had a chance to talk to him, and I said, Oda, naze, why would you do this? Why would you sneak out of the hospital to be able to go teach my kid how to play baseball? And he said, Jim-san, yakyū wa taisetsu desu ne. Which means, Jim, baseball's important, right? Isn't it? That illustrates what baseball means to Japan and what Japan means to baseball. It was one of the most humbling thing I'd ever been around. Major League Baseball in Japan, as it is elsewhere in the United States, is a business. My job when I moved there, and before I moved there, we had agencies that looked after the 4 kind of key pillars of our business. So media sales, so the ability to watch Major League games on Japanese television. Sponsorship, so Japanese companies co-branding with Major League, like the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Major League logos. Consumer products, which is caps, T-shirts, things like that. And then events, bringing events to Japan. So before I got there in 2003, we had agents do that for us. And so my job when I got there was to kind of take control over the operations and make sure that we were maximizing our revenue. And we had a great run, right? So the games are kind of ubiquitous right now on Japanese TV. We've had, as Marcus said, we've had Major League games there. I think we've had 4 opening days. We've run 5 WBCs there. So all of that has been great. When I got there, and Bobby can attest to this, the game wasn't the same as it is now. It was, and not just the play, but off the field as well. There's a great writer and a good friend of a lot of ours named Bob Whiting. He wrote the seminal book on Japanese baseball. If you haven't read it, get it. It's called You Gotta Have Wa. I think you're in it a lot, Boomer, as I remember. So it is he talked about Japanese baseball, and he said that Japanese baseball does well despite the marketing, not because of the marketing. And what he meant by that is when we got there, Japanese baseball is owned by corporations, the NPB, the professional teams there. And so the name of the company is on the jersey. And what happens is there's not an incentive for those teams to make money. It's really just an advertising expense for them. And when you think about it, if you don't want to make money, you're not trying to think about your customer. You're not thinking about your fan. And in a place where, they say here, the customer is king, they say there, kakama wa kami. So the king is God, right? So you run into a Starbucks in Japan and everything is absolutely perfect. There's so many people making sure that your experience is the best it can be. That wasn't the case in baseball. And baseball kind of suffered for that. The professional league suffered for that. The NPB is the national, or is the organizing committee, or professional league in Japan. They weren't happy when we opened our office there. I actually, the first week that I was there, was invited to go in and meet with the presidents, and they were not happy when I walked in. There were some knives I was expecting to be pulled out at any point, because they blamed us for taking Ichiro, for taking Matsui, and they didn't look at the reasons why those players left. And the reasons they left was because they wanted to play against the best in the world. That's a natural, instinct for an athlete to play against the best players they can. And they needed to leave to be able to do that. And then the third thing, and Bobby can attest to this much better than I can, but I've talked to a lot of player development people that said back then, the Japanese players weren't as fast, weren't as strong, and essentially weren't as good as the players that were playing in the major league. Now, 20 years later, 22 years later, that's all changed. Each one of those has changed. The marketing of baseball in Japan now is totally different than it was in 2003. There is an emphasis on engaging fans and making sure that it's easy to buy a ticket to a Giants game, that if you go to a Yakult game, that you're going to be entertained, that the food is easy to buy. All of these things that we have known for a long time at Major League Baseball, that we're in the entertainment business, right? We have a 3-hour, now 2 hours and 30 minutes, thanks to the commissioner and the rules changes, opportunity to entertain you, right? And we control every part of that process except the score of the game and the weather. And they're mostly dome stadiums in Japan, so they control the weather as well, right? They understand that now. So marketing is very, very different. The relationship with the NPB is 100% different. The NPB, recently the commissioner came in and met Commissioner Manfred in New York, and he held out the WBC as one of the reasons why the game has changed so much and the marketing has changed so much. And the relationship has never been better between us and the NPB. And then the last thing, the proof is on the field. I mean, there are so many great players. There's so many great players not named Shohei Ohtani, both playing there and playing here, let alone the greatest player in the world is Japanese. So that's all changed. Why has it changed? I think there's two things that you need to look at. Some of the change came from external. There's a phrase in Japanese called kurofune, which just means the black ships, and it's a reference to Commodore Perry coming in 1854. I'm sorry, there are history professors here, so I should be careful. I shouldn't have checked that. Was that 1854? Okay, good. And it forced Japan at cannon point to open up to the world, right? That's a colloquialism that you hear a lot in Japan, particularly in business, that outside pressure can make internal change. And so I think the WBC helped that. I think although Japan won the first two WBCs, I think they were shocked when they saw the quality of the fields at the major league ballparks, the strength, the size, the speed of the players, and I think that created lasting change within baseball. I also think, and Bobby, I told a story about you a little while ago about you creating change with Chiba Lotte as something. You did a lot of big things, but the one thing that was just memorable to me is teaching people how to get autographs. Right? In Japan, there's there's a fence from foul pole to foul pole. So there's literally a barrier between the players and your customer. Bobby not only raised that fence so people could get autographs, he taught people how to do it. I was sitting in your office one time and you slid the door open and people were coming up with this cardboard thing that you had printed you get the second baseman signed here, you get the third baseman signed here. That created lasting change. So some of the change come from the outside. Some of it was from inside. There are two literally titans of industry that bought baseball teams, SoftBank and Masayoshi Son, and Rakuten and Mikitani. Those gentlemen, I think, did more to change from within to make baseball in Japan, professional baseball, much more open to outside and to do the things that they do in their other businesses, which is making customers happy and focusing on the customer. And you see the benefits from that. So I think that's why it's changed. Where it is, where it's going, I think that there's some reason for concern, like there is in the United States, about the play in Japan. There are fewer players playing, kids playing baseball than there have been in the past. The good news is I think the government is working on that. Marcus mentioned I was fortunate enough to be on a committee and a board with other sports marketing professionals in Japan that the government put together, and they understand the challenge and I think they're addressing it. So, but there are a lot of really positive things. One thing is women's baseball in Japan is by far the top in the world in terms of the amount of money that's spent on it, the amount of opportunity for it, which is, if you've been to Japan, is somewhat counterintuitive because I think Japan has been a little bit slower than the rest of the world in the area of giving women, equal opportunities, but that's not the case in baseball, which is wonderful to see. And then you're going to see players continue to come over. You're going to see hopefully a pitcher named Yamamoto pitching in the major leagues next year. There's Roki Sasaki, who lives at about 103 miles an hour, that is every one of our teams are anxious to get their hands on. So I think there will be a pipeline coming, and I think Japanese baseball is going to continue to focus on the marketing of the product there. There's a brand new ballpark in Sapporo that is spectacular, absolutely major league in every way. And I think in the next 10 years, there's going to be a state-of-the-art baseball facility in central Tokyo in the fish market area that we moved a few years ago called Tsukiji, and I think that's where you're going to see the Giants playing. So I wanted to close. I said there were two stories. I wanted to give one last story as I close. And again, I think this really illustrates what baseball means to Japan and what Japan means to baseball. So like a lot of people in this room, we were in Japan on 3/11, March 11, 2011, when there was the triple disaster up in Tohoku. And, it impacted us. My youngest was in a pool. Everything started moving back and forth, and he was being thrown against, and we're in Tokyo, so we're a few hundred miles away. He's been thrown against the side of the pool. My wife, thankfully, was there and grabbed him and pulled him out. I had all of my employees staying in my house for 3 or 4 days because the trains couldn't move. It was a while before, electricity was restored, all of these things. But if Tokyo was bad, Tohoku was a nightmare. And there were, estimated, you see estimates between 16 and 18,000 people that died. It would have been much worse if it wasn't for this wonderful, maddening habit of the Japanese to follow rules, right? And they followed the rules. And the rules, the tsunami warnings went off. Most people evacuated. And that's why more people didn't die. About 10 days or so after everything happened, Major League Baseball and UNICEF went up to Tohoku, and we made a presentation of money and equipment to this relocation center where a lot of the people who had been affected were living. UNICEF asked me, do you want to go behind the security lines and see the disaster zone? Because obviously the center was beyond that. It's a town called Natori, which is near Sendai. And I said I would like to see it. So they took me to the school of the kids that we were going to meet later. And the school was perpendicular to the ocean. It was 3 kilometers from the water, so there was no concern about the tsunami. When everything happened, the kids and the teachers were moved to the 2nd and 3rd floor, and the people in the local neighborhood, were on the 1st floor. That was their evacuation place. It was 3 kilometers. The tsunami came 4 kilometers, and it was. I try to get through this. Sometimes there's often I tell the story and I don't get choked up, so I'm trying to make this one of those times. The tsunami came in, and the front of the school was like a prow of a ship, and the water just came right around and killed everybody on the 1st floor. So we went to see the kids that were on the 2nd and the 3rd floor. So UNICEF and MLB wanted a photo op, so I presented, ironically, I think it was a soccer ball, to this kid that they had set forth to accept it. And in Japan, another thing about Japanese youth baseball, everyone gets a number, and if you're number 12, you're the newest, youngest, maybe not the most talented player on the team. I probably would have been a 14 or 15. If you were number 1, you were the guy, right? So they put up this guy named, to accept the ball. His name was Nomura, and his Nomura captain, and he was number 1. So I hand it to him. We get a picture taken, and he goes and sits down. And I asked somebody from the shelter. I said, "Tell me about his story." And he was on the 2nd floor. His parents and his little brother were on the 1st floor, and they didn't make it. So I went over and felt an urge to talk to him, and I couldn't find the words in English to say to him, let alone in Japanese, which my Japanese is not great, and it just was really, really hard. But I felt the need to talk to him. He saw that. He saw that I was struggling with it, and he said, "Daijobu, nanakoroba ya oki," and I knew what the words meant. I didn't know the meaning of what he was saying. So on the car ride back to Tokyo, I said to my assistant, I said, what does he mean, nanakoroba ya oki? And she goes, well, it's a Japanese proverb. If you get knocked down 7 times, you get up 8 times. And again, if you want to know what baseball means to Japan, and Japan means to baseball, it's a 13-year-old kid trying to console me by saying, it's okay, I got this. Fast forward a few weeks later, we brought his team down to Tokyo. The Giants were really nice to have these kids run out on the field, at first pitch, which was a really cool experience for them. But before that, my kids went to the American school. We brought them to the American school. The parents got together, and hot dogs, hamburgers, had an American cookout for them, and we organized a baseball game between them and our JV team at the American school. And that team had, 3 kids that went on the American team, 3 kids that went on to play college baseball, including, a starting third baseman at UVA, right? So it's a really good team. Japanese kids hadn't played since March 10th, right? What do you think happens? 8-1, the Japanese kids win, and Nomura, 4 for 4 and pitched, the complete game. So nanakoroba ya oki. Anyways, thank you. I really can't wait to hear what everyone else has to say, and it's a beautiful place. Thank you for inviting me.